Good morning and welcome to the Always Believer Season 2. We've officially started the podcast on the Always Believer, and today Cassandra, am sitting down with Ilona Pamplona to have a conversation about quite a few things. Good morning, Ilona.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here.
I know. I'm so excited. Every time I get to sit down with a guest on this podcast, it's just so uplifting. I just feel in such a good space. And when I finish the recording, I'm just like ready to dance through the streets or something. So it's kind of crazy what kind of vibes that you get from kind of the people you get to sit down and talk to.
Oh my gosh. I was just on a podcast yesterday and afterwards I was like, I can do all the things. It is connection is invigorating.
Exactly. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am Ilona Pamplona. I'm an astrology informed life coach. I have my master's in health and wellness coaching with a concentration in integrated wellness practices, which is a really fancy name for saying mindfulness. I've had a very long journey to discovering who I am, what I want to do, and how I get there. And that's part of the astrology informed life coach. It's using the birth chart not as like a predictive tool or this like witchy thing, more of to say, okay, this is who you came, this is your imprint, and how can we use that to figure out what you came to do and really help. When I particularly love helping women get empowered in their life purpose, their soul's purpose, and really finding a pathway to that.
And in your journey, when you discovered who you are, what are some of the core things that make up Ilona Pamplona?
Oh my goodness. So like as a recipe of who I am, core things, first of all is connection. And I always go back to astrology because as I learned astrology, I'm like, wow, this is in my chart. Because I have a lot of placements that are about people and connections and bringing people together and creating harmony and like, in just this, like this relating. People connections is a huge part of it. Another core thing that makes me is intuition. I grew up with a very what I call a spiritually fluid mom. So even though my father was of a specific religion, he was Roman Catholic, my mom believed in all the faiths and all the magic that believing in something bigger brought to us. And that allowed for us to trust in something bigger. And I would say also culture and language. I am a polyglot. I've been to 30 countries, hundreds of cities around the world, and really getting to have said I've seen the world. And that is a core thing of what makes me me and why I do this work, because I've seen that no matter where you are, no matter what language we speak, no matter what religion, we're all looking for the same thing. We're all struggling with the same themes. We're all just trying to find the thing that makes us feel fulfilled. And so that was my insight to part of this work that I do as well.
Now, one of the first questions that I have is, can you define polyglot?
Oh yeah. So polyglot is just a fancy word for speaks more than one language.
Oh, okay. Because I was thinking a globetrotter, but polyglot is multilingual. So how many languages do you speak?
Great question. Right now I'm saying four. So I was raised in a bilingual home, English and Spanish. I studied Italian from high school all through college. I was a Italian and Spanish double major, Portuguese minor in college, and I also took French and German as electives. And at one point in my past career, so I spent 15 years in higher education, I had to travel to China a lot. And so I ended up learning some basic Mandarin. And I wherever I went, I always picked up a word or a phrase. I just love how knowing just enough can create a sense of trust in a complete stranger. And so for me, language has been a bridge of trust and commonality.
And I mean, so one of my jobs, because I'm a foreign area officer in the reserves in the Navy, I work basically in a multilingual environment where everyone that I pretty much know in that field speaks at least one other language, but then if not, two to three or sometimes six. Which I've been very envious of because languages don't come easy to me, but I've had to force myself to kind of adapt to that. So, like, I do think, I truly believe that if all you did in life was learn languages, you can be very successful.
I'm obsessed with that philosophy, just because it's what I dedicated the first part of my life to.
I believe
I
that.
It is a bridge builder. It is an absolute bridge builder because you don't ever only learn a language. It's almost impossible to not learn the culture and some kind of insights to the people of the language when you're learning that language. And so that's why it's such a
Exactly.
huge bridge.
Exactly. So I speak Bahasa, Indonesian, and when I was learning
Terima kasih.
that oh, sorry, maaf, what did you say?
All I said was terima kasih, right? Is that
Terima
thank you?
kasih. Yeah, selamat pagi.
Yeah.
um, when I was learning that, everything that we did was learning about the culture and the economy and the problems. So you learn it all in the language. But then, in addition to that, when you start actually listening to foreign news, you get like all of this insight that you could never have if you just only have the English version. And I
Mhm.
stand by that as well. And I think that multi or bilingual, or what was it, polyglot,
Polyglot.
people who are polyglot, how do you use that adjective? Or
Yes, you did it
okay,
great.
who are polyglot, like they don't even know or couldn't see the potential of, like, they need jobs for so many different things. I mean, there when the Iraq war started, there's this book, it's called Ashley's War. It's an amazing book, but it's actually also about women, Arabic speakers that have to go out basically with army rangers, so they have no training, and they're in Kandahar, like basically just with other women, who army women, who are like trying to speak to the women, and how life threatening that was. But like, I don't know, like you just couldn't imagine like what options you have in life unless you, yeah, anyway, I'm going on a tangent, but I
I
just
love it.
love that. One of the other things you were talking about when you were talking about like the kind of recipe that makes up you, I was watching you live on one of your links, and you were talking about your mom being very intuitive, to the point of someone could ask your mom something, and from her intuition she could kind of gather and have like very sound advice. Do you feel the same way, that you can also do that?
I love this question because for a long time, you know, my mom didn't hone it, right? So she would use it as, "Oh, I have this over someone and I've been told I have good intuition." So it just became facts rather than like a an understanding of your inner knowing. And so it took me time to understand that I also have that and that it expresses differently. So there are so many pathways to inner knowing, right? Well, or these gut feelings or intuition, they're called the clairs. So people are very aware with the clairvoyant term, but that literally means to see clearly. I don't see things. Thank goodness I don't see people. I don't see visions. Some people are clairaudient. They hear things clearly. I don't hear voices, but sometimes I just get it's almost like I imagine a note drops into my brain and says, "You need to know this right now." Or I'll get a feeling like I do oracle cards. And so I don't know how other people do oracle cards, but when I do it, it's because I'm literally getting a tingle throughout my left side when I'm picking the cards. Like it tells me which cards to pick. And when I do card readings, people are like, "How did you know that?" I'm like, "I didn't, but this feeling, this inner knowing, this connection that I've developed allows me to connect with what you needed to hear, what you needed to see." It's the connection.
Wow. And so do you think that that's inherent from your generations, like this connection kind of has come through your generations, or do you think it's something that you can really work on to actually hone in on?
I think everyone has it. I think everyone has it. And sometimes it takes trusting it, right? Because like I said, some when I'm doing the cards, it's like a tingling sensation. And sometimes if you're not aware that that's a sign, you're going to completely miss it. And so it's so this is where connection to self becomes so important. When you really know yourself at such a deep level, the personal development work isn't just this fluffy woo woo thing that people are getting into. It's getting to know yourself at such a deep level that when you feel something, you can discern if it's a sign or not. When you get like a random thought in your head, you can discern if this is something you can use or not. And so I think it's totally something we can develop. I just think we've been disconnected from the possibility of connecting to that.
Yeah, and I just want to go back a little bit to your childhood, and build up a little bit from there to talk about the path you chose, and then why you went to university and like how you got your master's. But I saw in one of your writings that your nickname as a child was "Y por qué,"
Yes.
and why was that?
Because I would always ask, "And why? And why?" I was always really curious as a child. I wanted I just love information. I totally am an information nerd. My sister jokes that I'm the smartest person she knows, and it's just because I've I speak languages, I travel the world. I have been interested in wide ranges of subjects. So while some people focus on something, I want to know all of it for everywhere, for everything, because there's so much we can consume in this world. This world holds so much. So for me, it's always like a sense of curiosity that I've had.
And do you think that this sense of curiosity has led you on the path you're on now? Like, because obviously curiosity, connection, like maybe that's kind of a far jump, but maybe because you are so open minded and willing to learn and wanting to be so curious about cultures and languages and all of those things, do you think that that has helped you find this connection?
I love this question because as you were speaking, it makes me think, yeah, my gut answer is, yeah, I think that being curious is what opens us to possibility. Like if you can only see the world through one distinct lens, oftentimes a lens we didn't choose, but we were given because of education, our family, our culture, we are, it's really hard to open into other ways of being, other possibilities, other lenses. And so my parents were from Latin America, but from two different countries, from two different social economic classes. We were in America in a different status as well. We were more middle class, while my parents had two different stratas. And so I had a baseline of people who were different, even amongst themselves, in a place that was different to them. So even I think my parents gave me the foundations for curiosity, and I was just lucky enough that they allowed me to run with it. Whereas some people's families are like, no, no, you get to do this way. And there were places where that was given to me, but there was a lot of, this is your life. I can't tell you what to do. Go figure it out.
Which countries are your parents from?
Oh, so my father was from Colombia and my mom is from Ecuador.
Oh, okay. So both from South America. So I was able to travel. I was living in a van, like traveling down through South America, and I sailed from Panama to Colombia. And then I picked up my van because, the Darien Gap, you can't drive all the way. And so I had to ship my car, and they don't have ferries. So
Wow.
that was very eye opening, because I picked up my car in Cartagena and drove all the way from Cartagena to uh, Bogota, Medellin, Cali, like down to Ecuador to
Oh
see.
my God, I'm so jealous.
So, and then once I got to Ecuador, I was able to actually stay there for Christmas. So I met up with just a girl who lived with us like as a foreign exchange student. So that was like an insight into that culture that I would have never had if my parents wouldn't have been open minded to let her come live with us for a year.
Wow, that is, and how amazing it is for you to have not just been, taking taxis and the planes, but to literally be able to see the landscapes that connect the countries and the cities and these places that not all of us get to see. I'm just dreaming of what that would look like right now.
So when you moved to America with your family, where did you move to?
So my parents actually met in New York. So
Oh,
I was born
okay.
and raised here. My siblings and I were all born in New York,
Oh, okay.
and we were raised in the United States. But they came here. They were at a party, and the rest is history. And they were together for 39 years until my dad unexpectedly passed away. But so we had a very, but the thing about that though was because in the I'm gonna date myself, the 80s, right? New York was
No, no,
very
ma'am, you are not dating yourself at all in this space.
diverse. So in the 80s, New York was very diverse. For a while, Queens, where I lived until I was 8, was the number one diverse city in the country. It was the place where the most languages were spoken. Houston has now surpassed that. Um, But I grew up the beginning was in a place that was very diverse. We had a lot of first generation immigrant kids and second generation and just a lot of diversity. So for me, my start in this life was diversity, exposure, like that. It was just such a beautiful exposure to it all.
Yeah, and I think that how amazing, because as a child I grew up with no diversity. So it was on my decisions, not knowing this, like I didn't know that I needed diversity, but in the decisions I made, I got introduced to all these cultures and travel and all that. Whereas if I would still be in my town right now, I would have literally not met anyone different than me, which is a scary thought at this point in my life.
Yeah. There's a Spanish phrase, nadie es profeta en su propia tierra, which is the idea that no one is a prophet in their own hometown, right? Sometimes you have to go out of your hometown to explore, to be known, but also to then make an impact somewhere else, because sometimes these roots, there's only so much we can do, which is, I think, what we were alluding to before when you have this one view, this one experience, this one exposure.
Exactly. And so you basically all of your undergrad was focused on language and, well, and learning cultures through language because that's how it works.
Yeah.
So so your father passed away, and how old were you when that happened?
That was actually recently. So that was only 4 years ago.
Okay. So did you already start in the space that you are in before he had passed away, or was that more of a transition based on that happening?
Great question. So the 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 desire to switch lanes. So I was in higher education for almost 15 years. My main role was to recruit students into programs at universities, different universities. Well, as I was in different universities in different times. And at one point in the career, I experienced pretty bad workplace abuse. And for the first time had this moment of like, wow, what am I doing? Is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life? Is this fulfilling my soul? I had this flash of like 10, 20, 30 years from now, if I'm still in this kind of environment, if I'm still being treated like this, is this going to be the legacy, the experience, the impact I want to have? And I was like, this isn't it. And I didn't know what it was. But here's where the curiosity came in. I said, okay, I'm going to switch to another place for now. And while I'm in this other place, I'm going to begin to explore, what do I like? What fills me up? What lights me up? What are my outside talents out of a job that's paying my bills, that is not actually the thing that fills me up in my soul? And so I spent probably a decade, no, but a little close to a decade, but not exactly a decade, going to workshops, going to seminars, going, because this is, obviously pre-COVID, there was a lot. And I was in Hoboken, New Jersey at one point, which is literally across the river from Manhattan. So I could go to work and then take a subway right into New York and go to a workshop, a webinar, see someone speak at a bookstore. And I really just exposed myself to the things that I liked and see how far I wanted to go with that. And so that curiosity allowed me to figure out one day, I love helping people. So in higher education, I felt that I was helping kids get into college because my focus was first generation, underrepresented students and international students. I'm like, oh, I'm changing these people's lives. I'm bringing international students to America. If Americans won't go to abroad, then I can bring them here. So I felt like there was a purpose, but I thought I want to have more of a one-on-one impact. And so that's when I discovered coaching through some people that I saw speak. And I was like, wow, I didn't know I can get paid to do things that I do for my friends and my family, and sometimes even strangers accidentally. And that's what led to the idea of coaching. And I started my master's in coaching literally the semester before my dad died. So my dad died January 2nd of 2017, and the fall of 2016 was my first full semester of my master's program.
Wow. So then obviously any death in any family is very difficult, but maybe even making that transition prior to your father passing away gave you just the even the bare minimum tools to kind of figure out that grief and move through the grief, and maybe you wouldn't have had that previously.
Oh my goodness, Cassie, you hit it on the nail. My my family, we're very close. So my brother, my sister, my mom and I were all in the room with my dad when he was the day that he died, because it was very unexpected. My brother flew in from New York. I flew down from Virginia where I was living at the time, and my parents were in Florida with my sister. And my mom, my brother, and my sister, and even my father growing up, they're always like, "You're so emotional. You take everything so seriously." And in that moment of trauma, my family was in breakdown. Like, it was difficult to process. It was difficult to listen to the doctors. It was difficult to interact. But I somehow was the emotionally clearest person in the room, that the doctor even came to me and said, "I need to speak to you," because he said, in every one of these situations, there's always the one person who can handle this and manage this. And they're like, "You're the one." And I thought, wow, I'm usually the one that they say I can't. And I was like, well, what's different? What was the thing that would be different for me in this experience? And my first semester of grad school was a 13 or 15 weeks of grad school, where I had to meditate multiple times a week. For the first time in my life, I was consistently meditating. So this is like a week or two after consistently meditating for 15 weeks and really being present and calm and controlling my central nervous system through breath. I'm like, oh my goodness, my grad program probably just saved my life in the moment that we saw the loss of a life of a loved one.
So you transformed in just that short space from someone who would have never been able to handle grief in any capacity to someone who was like the chosen one to be the manager of all of it.
That's a
Wow.
great reframe. So I wouldn't say I could never handle it, but
Right.
I think I would have been less capable. I'm a supporter. So I think if no one was supporting, I would always step into the supporter role, but I think I would have been more emotional in the support process,
That makes total sense. Yeah.
which
That's
is not bad. I also don't want anyone to ever think that emotions are bad, but having that mindfulness and meditation practice allowed me to really be present and be at peace. So here's the thing that I learned too, Cassie, is that mindfulness and that presence allowed me to be at peace with the possibility of my dad. There was like in the beginning of the day, there was like, he'll be fine, we've got time. But there was a critical moment where like, this isn't, there's no return. And the attachment to my dad being alive for my family, I think was a difference, because I had learned also non-attachment and saying, if he's gone, I will be sad and I'm going to be okay.
wow. That's very transformative.
It
And
was.
you're right. I didn't mean it like that. Everyone has to handle grief no matter what in life. So thank you for pointing that out. But it's so amazing to just hear that, the first steps of moving towards like a space of exactly where you want to be kind of set you up for something really traumatic, and you being able to, you know, transform that trauma into something that like wouldn't take you down for days or weeks, or and keep you in a space that was really low.
Yeah, totally. My mom was not functional for months.
Yeah, and it's always just the hardest too, because I say this a lot, like, so there are those stages of grief that you have to go through, and the final stage is acceptance. And I do think there are people that stay in the first stage of grief for many years, if
Mhm.
not sometimes the rest of their lives, depending on where they are in that.
Correct.
That's
Absolutely.
that's hard. Just that in and of itself is like very difficult, and just like a space that's just very hard to get out of, especially when you get that far down a rabbit hole that's so difficult.
Yeah.
Now, when you just so where did you go? Which university did you attend for your master's degree?
So I did a master's at an institution called Maryland University for Integrative Health. And I had actually I started my health coaching journey or coaching journey earlier through Institute for Integrative Nutrition. It was a 1-year program. And there was this whole thing. If you want to get your master's, you can get a little bit of jumpstart with credits from this by going to this institution. I was like, oh, well, why not? This is great. Like, I want to keep on going. This fascinates me. And so and it's accredited. So that was the other thing. I was in higher ed for so long. I'm like, it has to be accredited. So it was great because it was also it met my values of that like holistic experience, and not just, so it was a mix of the traditional academic framework of education, but it also had that a little bit of like healing presence and intuition and knowing when those things come into play with the work that you do.
And so the master's degree, so it was through the integrative health. Was it partially health, or but it was a master's degree in coaching, is that correct?
Great question. So the master's itself was the master's in health and wellness coaching, but I would say 90%, 80 to 90% of the curriculum was coaching. In fact, there is an organization called ICF, it's the International Coaching Federation. And the big portion of the curriculum was what is a coach? How do you really hold space as a coach? What does it mean? So there was a lot of research, there was a lot of understanding in the traditional frameworks of what it is to be a coach, and comparing it, for example, to psychology, and how there is sometimes like an understanding overlap between psychology and coaching, but understanding the differentiation between who is a coach and who is a psychologist, right? Or a therapist. And so a lot of it was training to be able to suffice and to meet the requirements of one day being an ICF accredited coach, which is the gold standard of coaching across all coaching disciplines, whether you're a life coach or a business coach or a health coach. There is a kind of like the American Medical Association. It's kind of like that for the coaching world. And so the bulk of the curriculum was really making sure that your foundation as a coach was clear.
Oh, that is extremely fascinating and very interesting. So, when you decided to get your master's, you had multiple jobs on top of getting a master's. Were you doing night school, or was it like full-time student and other jobs? Like, how did you manage that?
Great question. So when I started it, my first semester, like I said, I was doing recruitment. At that point, it was solely international. And in the first semester, thank goodness, it was an online program. So we did have like exams and all this sort of stuff, but it was all online. And I'll never forget thinking like, how am I going to do this? Because that fall was the busiest travel season I had. I was pretty much out of the country 10 out of the 15 weeks. So I was like in Kenya and Indonesia and, London and like all these different places in Russia. But the ability to be like, okay, well, I'll bring my book and I'll download some of the stuff on the plane, because I had long plane rides. So I had that flexibility. That was a very demanding job. But after that first semester, when my dad passed away, when I started the second semester, I was still at that job. And my mom and I had a moment where she was like, you know what? I think this job is killing you. So she offered me the opportunity to quit my job and move in with her in the house that her and my dad had in Florida while I finished my coaching degree. So there are going to be times where, even as a fully mature adult, you're going to do things like move in with a parent so that you can fast track to a goal. And because of that, I was able to complete my degree probably a year to a year and a half faster than had I gone part-time, because I didn't do full-time credits. I couldn't with the job. So that first semester, I only took one course. The second semester, I only took another course. And so by the time I moved in with my mom, I was taking 3 to 4 courses.
So, basically,
Or 2 to 3
full-time
courses.
student.
Yeah. So I transitioned from part-time to full-time, but I also transitioned from full-time working to more of like consulting work to at least, cover my bills, since my mom lived in a house that the mortgage was paid off in.
Yeah, and at the Always Believer, like a lot of people that I interact with, like everyone is super motivated and doing multiple things at one time. And it can definitely be very overwhelming, especially like to take on grad school with a job and with managing a family and all of those things. And it looks different for everyone, but like it's possible for everyone to make a plan that suits their needs, even if it's taking on all of these things. Like, there is a way to do it if you're able to manage your time. And I just wanted to say that again, because I feel like everyone I talk to has been through that period of just working 20 plus hours a day. including myself. And I think that it just merits like one quick note because it is possible. It's just like the way you look at it and the way you have to visualize like the end point.
Right. And sometimes it's also saying what gets, I think a lot of people are, there's like a discomfort in saying what gets to take a back seat right now so that I can do this, right? Like you said, there are people who are doing two, three, four, five jobs, having family. Like I also experienced Epstein-Barr in my last job. So there are moments where I didn't have energy even in that semester, but there were moments of, okay, well, I'm really tired and I'm not going to watch TV. I'm not going to binge watch. I'm not going to do these things that deplete me, that don't nourish me, that don't get me to where I want. And sometimes it's really difficult for people who are stuck in the pattern.
And so you had mentioned, so you went to basically university to get like a degree for the gold standard of coaching, and there's many different coaching designations like life coach, et cetera, et cetera. So I saw when I was doing some of the research that yours is self-compassion and clarity coach. Can you explain that, what that means?
Yeah, I love it because while I was in grad school, we also learned, these academic frameworks for things that occur in our lives, and that people, we're in a world where we're able to talk about self-compassion and shame and vulnerability, and that wasn't really big for a long time. And so in my studies, I learned about this researcher out of UT Austin who studied self-compassion. And when I understood what it was, I'm like, oh my goodness, when I've worked with the clients that I've had while in grad school, because we had to also have clients to really get used to holding space and understanding what what looks like to work with clients. To me, I felt a really direct connection with self-compassion and what keeps clients, or at least the clients I attract, to being who they want to be and doing what they want to do. And so there's this framework. According to the research, self-compassion has these three dimensions. So it starts with self-judgment versus self-kindness. So when someone really wants to do something, they'll be like, oh no, I'm too broke, I'm too fat, I'm too this, I'm too lazy, I'm too yada, right? We judge ourselves for these things that we perceive as things that are in our way, versus self-kindness, which is like, oh, well, yeah, maybe there's that possibility. And maybe, maybe they're like being really kind and being like, oh, maybe I could do that. Or like, even if I can't, I'm going to be okay. Right. But this judgment loop isn't like a barrier to allowing possibility in the way I understood it. And then we have mindfulness versus over identification, because when we're approached with an issue, sometimes we really focus on the issue. The issue becomes life, rather than saying, hey, the issue is something that's happening in my life, right? Not like my entire life, right? We get consumed, we over identify with our problems, rather than getting this big picture mindful approach of saying, hey, is this the only thing that I have going for me? Is this the only thing that's happening in my life? Is this the only way to look at it? And that those dimensions is another access to self-compassion. And the last piece is isolation versus shared common humanity. And so there's this dimension of when we are not compassionate with ourselves, which I'll also define in a bit, we're thinking, I'm the only person, you guys don't understand, this is only happening to me. And so we isolate rather than saying, oh, maybe I'm not the only one. And when you see that there are other people that go through similar or like very, very parallel things, it relieves the pressure of the pain, which is the root of the word compassion. Everyone thinks self-compassion is like self-love and self-yay and self-care, but self-compassion is not that sexy. Compassion comes from Latin, compassione, which means to suffer with.
Okay.
And so when you're compassionate with someone, you're holding the space for them to unravel the things that they're suffering with. When you're holding self-compassion for yourself, you're holding the space for yourself to be like, this is icky. And I'm just going to hold space for myself, and I'm not going to judge myself. I'm not going to over identify with this. I'm not going to isolate. I'm going to be in this life while in the state of suffering so I can get through it rather than to get stuck in it.
Now, do you think that this technique could be used with people that are diagnosed with depression?
I think it definitely, obviously because as a coach, we don't talk about diagnosis, but I think, yes, this is something that a professional could approach someone who suffers from depression, right? To how, like, what are those dimensions of self-compassion? If you're in suffering, where are you in this list? Like, and maybe you're in one or all of them, and having a professional be like, okay, let's work with you now. And for those who can do the work, because obviously, like I said, there's a distinction between therapy and coaching, and so there might be people who have more than just that. But if someone who's depressed because of a situation and they're in those dimensions, it's a and we can, and if you can get them to see the breakthrough. Because here's the thing about coaching: we don't tell people things, we ask questions. Because so I talked about like this academic framework phrase before, because in studies, you cannot, if you tell someone what to do, they're not likely to either do it or maintain that behavior. But when you begin to ask questions and people start to auto reflect, self reflect, and come up with their own roots and own whys and their own ahas, then there's more of a true motivation to A, do it, and B, maintain it.
And so does that lead into like what is the concept of evidence-based coaching?
Right. And so exactly, right? Because there's some people who are intuitive coaches, right? So they're just using that gut feeling, which I think there is an aspect of a gut feeling in the coaching experience, but there's also what I'm so grateful for my degree, because I realized, wow, like, I'll throw down words on interviews and be like, well, in the trend theoretical model of behavior change, right? And I could be like, well, I can look at someone and be like, oh, I know exactly where you are in the stages of behavior change, and say, you're not ready for the change right now. All you need is awareness. Or I could be like, oh, you've actually taken action. What we need to learn is how to keep you to maintain it, because you've done action before. And what you're looking is for maintenance of behavior change. And so when these evidence-based coaching techniques is saying, okay, like, let's look at the science, let's look at the study of behavior, let's look at the study of like people and how they work, so that when we're in the coaching container, we're asking the questions that allow them to understand, without saying it, where they are and where they get to go.
And I got to give a quick shout out to Brene Brown because I feel like she brought, the scientific approach to vulnerability to the mainstream and actually normalize like and put science behind the term vulnerability. Um, but I just wanted to like, so when you look at people's vulnerabilities, how can this type of coaching help someone reach like acceptance in them actually being able to say like, this is what these are my aha moments, like how, in the coaching realm, like, and with vulnerability is, does that, how can you get people that have vulnerabilities reach acceptance?
Oh, I love this. So I'm a word nerd, and one thing that I started doing on Instagram 2 years ago is this thing I called spellings. And so every now and then I'll break down words to their root etymology, because I did take a linguistics class in college at one point. I'm like, I love words. And when we break down, so I actually broke down the word vulnerability. It comes from Latin vulnerabilis, which means a wound. And like, I have this imagery every time I hear the word vulnerability, because when I think of a wound, I think of, when you put on a band-aid and you take it off and it's been there for a while, your skin gets really like mushy, right? You need to remove the band-aid so that the skin can air out. So the band-aid is there for the initial phase so that bacteria doesn't get there, right? So when we're not being vulnerable is because we've been wounded and we're like, oh, I have to protect myself, I have to protect my heart, I have to protect my mind, right? So we're putting on that band-aid, and and so we think we're doing a great job at keeping on that band-aid for 1, 2, 40, 30, 50 years. And then when we take it off, it's like, that's like really junky in there. And you really need to, you need to give it enough time to heal, but then you need to make sure you take that band-aid off and show people the wound. So we're all trying to hide our wounds, but our wounds are our stories, are our strengths, are our magic. And so acceptance comes from when you can look at the wound, and when you're okay with other people looking at the wound, because acceptance comes when you integrate, right? When you say, this is me, I am that. But we're all the wounding, we're all trying to hide the wounds. And so when we look into vulnerability and we get people to see and allow themselves to show up as they are, right? Everyone thinks they have to be perfect, and perfect doesn't exist. It's an illusion that we've been sold by media and religion and culture. And when we can see actually our magic is our imperfection, are our wounds, are our scars, that's when we can accept. And acceptance, when we can accept, we can actually say, oh, now I can do it differently. Because the price we pay for hiding that wound is we're not doing some things that we really want to do, because we're doing such a great job at trying to protect not being seen as not perfect.
Yeah, wow, that is a very that's more than I could have ever asked for in an answer to that question. And it's also it's a concept that I've always been trying to explain to myself and maybe to others, but mostly to myself, is like when you experience the feelings of what is total failure, like having gone through that in the last couple years, you can let those failures like also make you vulnerable, but like then hide that and then hold you down. Or you can wear those failures on your sleeve, like outright, talk about it openly, and like move through the process. Because in the end, like, vulnerability and failures, experiencing failures, are only one step in the process of life. And I
Exactly.
feel like you don't want failures to like take on, or take over your whole life and hold you back. Like they should lead you to the next thing, to successes.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually what allows us to grow. Everyone's trying to be perfect, but when you're perfect, that means you're not growing.
And then, so what is astrology informed life coaching?
So astrology informed life coaching is just as it sounds. I do life coaching, but we start with a birth chart review to see what the stars have for your life story. So for example, my experiences, because I grew up, so my mom listened to Walter Mercado all my life, and he's a very famous Puerto Rican astrologer who passed away very recently, like 2 years ago. And so I grew up understanding people through the lens of astrology, and not from like, oh, you're so Taurus, but more of like, oh, I understand why that person is reactive because they're an Aries, or I understand why that person is trying to make the peace because they're a Libra. And so I always saw it as like the lens that I understood people through. And so I use astrology as really as a self-compassion and clarity tool, because when you understand what's in your chart, then you can forgive yourself for the things you don't like. And two, you can see clearly what you came here to do, what you came here to overcome. And so that's how I use the birth chart to then say, okay, so this is where you want to go with life, or this is what you want to get clear on life. We're going to use this tool to help you see that, and then just move into pure coaching, knowing that you have this tool as a compass to redirect you when you're feeling off.
Ah, so it's like another added dimension to help read a person and then help them in the self-compassion phase.
Yeah,
Or well, not
exactly.
phase, but I guess the coaching
Experience. Yeah.
experience. Um, and so I saw, so there's a couple of things that I was like a little bit excited to ask about. So can you have used or found a way to use spirituality and merge it with interior design?
Yeah. So I worked with a friend of mine who is an interior designer. And so recently we held a workshop because feng shui. So I'm not the expert on the feng shui, but feng shui is an Asian way of using your space to create energy for alignment in the life that you want. And what we noticed is there was a lot of similarities between the foundations of feng shui and the foundations of astrology, like the elements, fire, wind, earth. And so we did a workshop to show people how your space, you can add elements, those things that represent those elements in certain parts of your life and your room and your spaces to bring in that energy. For example, where we're interviewing right now, I am by the window, and in what's called the fame section of my life, which is really interesting because my desk used to be in another section, and I was there was not that much light, and I wasn't getting a lot of like clients or like connections. And the moment I moved this desk to this space, I started getting connections, I started getting asked to be on podcasts, I started getting more readings, and I was like, oh, there is something to this. So then when my friend contacted me about this, I'm like, yeah, I've experienced it. And the really interesting thing is, on the first day we went live on Instagram a few days, someone took our advice. They moved their work desk to the fame section and the career section, and they got a bonus at work and they got new clients in their side hustle. So there is like an energy, right? So this is why I love creating the spiritual aspect to coaching, because there is energy, and I can't separate them. I understand the science and I understand the intangible energy that we work with or that we are living in.
That is so cool. And now I'm very interested in this because I currently have all of my things in storage, and I want to move into a house or an apartment within the next couple years. But when I do, like, I want to seriously sit down and look at this and see how this could apply to my life. That's very cool.
It's
Um,
so fun.
and you also use essential oils.
Yes, I
I
love
love
it.
essential oils.
Me too. I'm obsessed. I've been using them for almost a decade, and I actually developed a group coaching program through essential oils. So some people use it, and I joke, they're the people who are going to be like, you could put a drop of lemon in your water and peppermint for your clarity or your headache. But I thought these, like, especially if they're pure, right? Because there are a lot of synthetic oils in the market. But when you have a pure plant oil, therapeutic grade oil, there's a frequency that's attached to it. And that it actually connects to the part of our brain that holds memories. And so what I've noticed is sometimes when people would smell some oil, they'll be like, oh, this reminds me of this. And someone directly next to them be like, what are you talking about? This doesn't smell like that. This smells like this. And I was like, oh, people are having very unique reactions, relations, and experiences to the same combination of oils. And so I did an experiment because the essential oil company that I use, the person who created the blends, did it with the frequency of certain feelings, emotions, and experiences in mind. And so I blind tested a few of the emotions to people, and they had really, some people cried, they got like, it was reminding them of family, or like something that they were blocked in their life. Like I noticed some people couldn't even smell an oil. I once did it for these two business partners, and one of them was like, oh my gosh, I love this oil, I need this in my life. And the other one's like, I can't smell it. And the other one was like, I can smell it from here. And it was a oil called Envision. And it was funny because that actually started a little spat. And I felt so bad because the one who could smell it, like, see, I told you, I keep on saying there's a vision for this company to look at everywhere we can go and you can't see it. And sure enough, she's like, I don't smell it. And she couldn't see it. And so there was this
Wow.
energetic tie. I know, I was like, this is a theory that I'm running with. And this magic that your sense of scent is another pathway to your intuition or to what's emotionally, because the part of our brain that is tied to memory is not just tied to memory, it's also tied to emotions. So you're going to elicit emotional responses and memory responses just by smelling something. Like if I were to tell you orange, you're probably going to imagine the smell of an orange, maybe a summer day, or maybe someone's going to remember a grandma's cake that she would make oranges with. Even the thought of a smell can elicit this memory. And so imagine actually smelling something and how that floods you with experiences. And so I was able to create this group coaching thing where, based on people's responses, I can coach them around that emotion and have them have a breakthrough with forgiveness or vision or belief or faith and things like that.
It's so funny you said orange because orange is my favorite color.
Oh my goodness.
So even still, there's some, but I'm also thinking in my head, if you took spirituality and interior design and then add the perfect combination of essential oil, like you might combust.
Yeah.
Just
You
because.
combust in
In
alignment.
alignment. Yep. Total balance. um and then I actually came up with a little bit more of an abstract question, and it has to do with pain, because if you are dealing with self-compassion, there's in vulnerability, there's going to be pain associated to that. So how in the coaching sphere do can you use, like, get people to face pain rather than run away from it, to like actually heal a little bit in that space, and maybe not heal forever, but like just come to like an acceptance with pain that they've had in the past.
I love this. And I'm going to make sure that I specify that I work with like experiential, like emotional pain rather than like a physical pain. And I actually love this question because in mindfulness and a lot of, more ancient religious practices and, things like Buddhism, we get attached to pain. We get attached to the story that we create around pain. We get attached to our relationship to the pain. And so like for me, when I think about a client who's suffering with an emotional experiences, we get to determine first, like, well, what do they want to see as an outcome? And then stay open and curious to what's outside of this. And when we dig, it's always like, okay, how are you seeing this, and how are the other ways of seeing it? Because the problem with pain is when we're in pain, we're only seeing the pain and our direct and singular relationship to the pain at that moment. And the only way out of staying in pain is being able to see what's outside of that. So I can tell you, for example, from my own personal experience, the workplace abuse was something that caused me pain for a good amount of time, and it had like residual experiences even after I left. So the pain of like not feeling like enough, not feeling like I'm good enough at work, not feeling like I'll be successful, and then being reminded of the pain that felt. And so that was like a trauma loop for a solid year, until one day I was like, oh, but I'm doing really well in this job, and there's a talk of being promoted. So is this really still my story? Is this really still my reality? And so I was lucky to have the tools to ask questions and say, do I want to stay in the experience of this pain, or do I want to look at what else is outside of this and what is real or not? Because sometimes we create a story about how we want to relate to the pain. And this is not to say that we don't experience pain, but it's, how are you choosing to relate to it? Do you want to stay attached, or do you actually want to be free from it? And I wanted to be free. And so that required me saying, well, what's outside of the pain? And now, when I actually openly talk about the fact that I had worked, I like 5 years ago, I would not tell people about this. And now I'm like, no, thank gosh I went through that, because I wouldn't be here. I would probably still be stuck in a career where I'd be underpaid, undervalued, underrecognized, because I wasn't living my purpose. And that pain broke me through to finding my purpose. And so I create a new relationship to that thing that could have been an eternal pain point.
Plus, one of the things that I've really been coming to terms with lately is there's so many things that I feel like I hold near and dear to my heart. But the more we talk about them openly, the more people come out of the woodwork to tell you that they're going through similar things or the same thing, and that now they feel like they have someone they can talk to, or, it changes the game for them too. So when you're telling your story, like, also know that even though you might feel alone in that, like, that's probably not true. And there's probably
Mhm.
someone who has experienced something similar, or, maybe not the exact same thing, but something that connects on the same level as that,
Yeah, exactly.
which I think is very important, because then when we feel like we have a community, then we can like also start to recognize like what the problems are, and talk through them with people.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going a little bit off cuff, but I couldn't help but notice that you sat next to Deepak Chopra on a flight from Chile to Bogota. And I mean, if there was never a sign, I feel like that would have been that you're in the right place in your life. So, did anything crazy happen on that flight?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny that we bring this up, because that was the confirmation. I was in a 5-week recruitment trip through Latin America. I'm like, I love what I do, but this isn't what I'm meant to be. And I kept on saying, like, I want to sign. I want to sign that I was in that make or break moment, that I was either going to keep on growing in that industry, or I was going to switch lanes eventually. And so it was a 6 a.m. flight, and was tired. I was exhausted. I almost like didn't wake up on time. And there was all this commotion in the front of the line. And I'm like, what's happening? And then I saw Deepak enter, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And at the time I was working with a university that would let us fly business if it was a certain length of itinerary. And so I was like, there's a possibility that I am sitting next to Deepak. And I'm like, I am sitting. And I got to my turn, like, I am sitting next to Deepak Chopra. So, there's a hesitation. Do you talk to him? Do you don't? So I started some small talk, and eventually figured out that I knew who he was. And so it was quiet. And then he heard me speaking in Spanish and with the flight stuff, because it was a Colombian airline, like we grew up with it because my dad was from Colombia. And he's like, leaned over and was like, "Do you speak Spanish?" I'm like, "Yep." And he, asked me to help him with customs when we landed, which I didn't get to because he was, you know, staying there and I was connecting. But it was the portal. See, language was my portal to having a deep conversation with Deepak Chopra, because he started talking about how he had grandchildren who were multilingual because they spoke Hindi, and the wife, or the this daughter-in-law, I think she was from some part of Asia, so they spoke an Asian language. They had a nanny who was from somewhere in Latin America, so the children had at least 4 languages under their belt, and they were like 5 at the time. And just being able to say, wow, language connected me to this human being who's so highly regarded, was really fun. And then my favorite part of the story of sitting next to Deepak was he goes to the restroom, like, you know what, I'm gonna let him rest. It's a 6-hour flight. It was really early. And I pull out a book. I was reading The Four Agreements at the time by Don Miguel Ruiz. And he leans over and he's like, "What are you reading?" And I'm like, "Oh, The Four Agreements." He's like, "That's a good one, but have you read My Seven Laws of Spiritual Success?" And so I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm on a plane next to Deepak reading The Four Agreements. Like, what is life?" So that was just validating for I'm on the right path, but it was also so amazing to be like, he's a human being and language connected us. Like literally, when I said, "What is part of my recipe?" Language connected me.
Plus, I mean, if you also look at it from that standpoint, it was like taking that language and multilingual lifestyle from your undergrad and connecting it to the coaching and to the meditation and that aspect of your master's degree. Like, isn't that the perfect connection? It just seems like it all came together in this very harmonious circle of balance.
Yeah, totally.
And then, so we're going to get ready to wrap up here. It's been such an invigorating conversation. One of the things I also saw is the Soflo Vibe Tribe
Oh yeah.
by Jessica Prestia.
Prestia,
Uh,
yep.
what is that? And you are a member of this, and what's that about? And
I
how?
love this question. It was such an integral part of my transition from higher education into this new world. When my dad passed away and I moved in with my mom, we eventually sold her house and moved to from the west coast of Florida to the east coast of Florida. And I didn't know anybody. And once again, my life is full of serendipity. And my mom was like, "Let's go to the mall. I need to buy something." And someone had these crystals. I'm like, "Oh, love your crystals." And they're like, "Oh my goodness, you know about these things." I'm like, "Yeah, I do chakra card readings. I just So they invited me to an event. I couldn't go that time. I went to the next event where I met Jess, who's kind of she's the chief priestess of this tribe. Um, and pre-COVID, it was basically a group of us who would meet at the beach, either Del Rey or Pompano, typically Pompano, and we would hold spiritual events where she would lead with a meditation. I would read chakra cards. There's another Vibe Tribe member, Hello Ikaru, who would read tarot cards. We'd have sometimes people who would do tapping. So I don't know if you know about EFT tapping. Some people would do yoga poses, or so we would have all types of people doing just spiritual connective work. And we'd also have this amazing fun group of photographers, Joe, as part of the head of the photography crew, that would do lidar photography, because often we did it during a full moon and at night. So it was just it was almost like a spiritual carnival at the beach. And it was just such an amazing way to continue to grow our spiritual gifts and connect with others and gift that to them.
Wow, that sounds like amazing. And also when you just get into like a beach atmosphere with a group of people, it just is all instantly so calming. But then to have like the different aspects of spirituality, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so as we close up here, I ask everyone a would you rather question just to get a little bit more insight into your life. So this is the question that I came up with for you.
Okay.
Would you rather go into the past and meet your ancestors, or go into the future and meet your great great grandchildren, and why?
I was obsessed. I'm obsessed with this question. I would rather go to the past and meet my great great ancestors, because a lot of who we are and a lot of what limits us are patterns that we picked up from people we don't, family members, ancestors we don't even know. And so I would want to learn from them so that my future generations don't have to continue repeating that pattern.
Ah, very insightful. Thank you. And the final question I have before we go through and tell everyone how to reach out to you and the Always Believer is so I actually ended up asking you a question at the beginning that was kind of like, what is the recipe that makes up you? Now, this question is, so what are the 3 words that you would use to describe what you embody and how they represent you?
Okay. So the first word that came up for me is magic, because I believe life is magical, and I believe there's so much magic that we can access when we look outside of the world that we've been told, like the tangible third dimensional world. We can live a life of magic, and these tools like astrology and essential oils and blah blah blah, there's so many fun ways of connecting with magic, and sometimes it's as simple as just human connection. So magic, compassion, because I've really learned to be okay with the non-magical parts, right? Like magic is great, and then the non-magic is great, because the non-magic leads to the great stuff. Um, and I think the third word, oh, I love words so much. I'm like, oh, which word do I pick? Which word do I pick? I think would probably be connection, because I don't think I would be anywhere in this lifetime if it weren't for the people that connected me to the magical experiences. Like I can always have a trail to who got me to that person, to that job, to that gift, to that experience, to that anything, right? People, this connection, we are all one. We are actually connected. We are all, like, if you go to quantum physics and you understand the quantum field, which I don't fully understand, but my experience of understanding it is we're experiencing the third dimension, but in the quantum field, we're just a composite of highly concentrated thoughts in the connected quantum field. And this experience of separation, this illusion of separation, is what keeps us from accessing the magic in this lifetime. So I'd say magic, compassion, and connection.
Wow. And what I was going to add for connection when you said that is there are, moments in life that you can look back on. It's like if I wouldn't have met that person at that moment, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I'm a huge advocate. Like you can be the smartest person in the world, but without the right moments in life, like you might not. And that's kind of like what Outliers, the book Outliers, is
Yes,
by
I love
Malcolm
that book.
Gladwell. But I definitely agree wholeheartedly that like sometimes it's just those chance connections that you make that lead your life, and that is a very powerful thing, and that's a great word. Thank you so much for giving us some insight. So, wrapping up finally, so Ilona, how do we get a hold of you? You can give us Instagram, website. I mean, do people need to get a hold of you right now before it's linked in the comments? So, how do we do that?
Well, even though I should be directing them to my website, it's under construction, but Ilona Pamplona is still available. ilonapamplona.com. It's going through a revamp. But Instagram, I am so responsive on Instagram at Ilona Pamplona. All my information, if you wanted to book a 30-minute discovery call, or if you wanted to book a life path astrology reading, if you're ready to get into that, like all of that is available through the booking link on my Instagram. And I'm really accessible there.
And on Alona's Instagram, her bio is the link tree. So it also gives you a lot of other links to many of her things. So you can go research some more, ask her questions on there. And of course, this is the Always Believer. So we are at the Always Believer on Instagram. Ariadna has come out with different merch, and you can find all of that in the bio. And if you need to reach out to us, so we'll have everything linked. Some of the discussion that we had today will be linked on the Instagram post and on the blog, thealwaysbeliever.com. But please come there, comment, tell us what you think. And yeah, it's just been another great hour as always. I never have a bad hour, and that's what's so exciting about this right now. So thank you so much for sitting down with us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.
Oh, you too. And thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be able to share with everyone.
Thank you so much. Adios.
Ciao.